I think it's good. So this one is like such the product of our culture, guys. So what is your favorite superhero? Like, what's your favorite superhero?
I mean, I think the world of Spider-Man. So like the different variations of Spider-Man.
The multiverse of Spider-Man?
Yeah, like I love Miles Morales. I love Peter Parker. I love, all the variations of that kind of character, because anything that makes like a human superhero is dope for me.
Truth.
Power and responsibility. I agree with Frank.
Yep. No, I was a Spider-Man guy for the longest time until Guardians of the Galaxy. Star-Lord came around and just kind of had that vibe of just kind of laid back. I'm going to listen to my tunes and I'm going to help out where I can. I kind of dig that vibe too.
Jeff?
I'd throw my hat in with Spider-Man too. I mean,
y'all are all Spider-Man men.
He's the perfect super.
He's great.
Let me guess, yours is Leonardo or something, right?
Which turtle?
Which turtle?
You suck, because that was actually the one. Hold up. In all fairness, I grew up, it was Raphael, and then I grew up and became a man. All right. No, but
no,
okay.
It's Donatello.
No, it's Leonardo. It really is. So. But Frank, it makes me feel good that you know me like that, But seriously, I guess the point I was getting at is the thing that makes a good superhero good is the same thing that we're seeing translating into pastorate now and even leadership in general. It is the strength, but it's the backstory and it's the weakness. Like, as even you were talking about the multiverse, I'm thinking every single version of Spider-Man has like a very wounded past. Mm-hmm. Star-Lord's mother got cancer given to him by his father, and then he had to murder his father. Isn't that right?
Yeah. That's right.
And then Leonardo, there's a whole new backstory to that. You don't want me to get into that. I promise you. I should start a whole nother podcast, but it's the same thing. It's like woundedness. And I think what you could summarize it up is transparency in who they are. And Carey Nieuwhof actually had an article he just released, and he was talking about where's the line between us being transparent as leaders versus bleeding over into oversharing. Because I know that all of us, and maybe I think all of us to some extent are guilty of it. We've had moments where we're trying to be transparent. Maybe there's something coming down the pipe and you're trying to think through it out loud, and maybe you just accidentally overshare and you're like, man, I shouldn't have let that person go there, because all it did was create anxiety in them. So I guess, first of all, real talk, transparency. Has there ever been a time when maybe you were over transparent and probably overshared a little bit? Anybody have a moment you like to talk about?
I mean, last year I went through a major transition at my church, obviously. And at the beginning stages, I didn't really have a good outlet for it. So during the first few weeks, I used the morning after ministry show to kind of just unload a little bit, which is a very dangerous space to do that on a public Facebook show where your entire church can watch and then go back and rewatch and listen to on a podcast. And I got some really good critique from my elders on, hey, we understand you wanting to be transparent and you fleshing out some of these feelings you're going through, but it's possible that a social setting like that is not the best way to do that.
I know. I remember one time I was preaching a sermon, and I talked about growing up, which is not something that's like very private for me, but my father was very abusive. He was an alcoholic, and he used to like hit my mom. And I remember one aspect, I was sharing this in the story. I was like, my dad was like about to hit my mom or something, and I was like 12, so I was like a pretty big kid, and I got in my dad's face, and I was like, "You're never gonna hit him again." Like that was like a big, like I was gonna use it as like a kind of a climactic part of my sermon. I forgot kind of what the whole context of the sermon was, but I remember in sermon critique about my sermon, one thing. Obviously, I'm Cuban. I'm very passionate, and sometimes my passionateness in my sermon, it comes off as like emotional, I guess. And so someone said like, hey, have you completely processed like what you went through? Because there's a line of being transparent and then like bleeding in the pulpit. And if you haven't been able to process kind of the wounds and the pains you've gone through in your personal life, it's probably not the place to process that in the pulpit, because you may like rip open wounds and other people who are still in the midst of that. And I remember hearing that, and I actually chose not to talk about that moment, not because I haven't processed it, but I just wanted to make sure I truly have processed it before I say it in front of a bunch of people. But I've always kind of thought about that. It's like, where is the line of transparency? Because I think the mark of a good pastor is being able to highlight what Scripture says and connect it to real life issues, especially when it's connected to real life issues within your own life. But how do you do that in a way that doesn't, I don't know, hurt your reputation? Is that a good word? Or like hurt your credibility? I'm not sure like how to word that, but like, I don't know. This is a great conversation because I don't know the answer to this question because I'm such a transparent person that like I'm apologizing all the time by how transparent I try to be, and I realize I should probably figure it out. So go ahead.
I found that I think as a younger senior pastor, you can undermine your own leadership without intending to by doing this because you can almost put your own immaturity on display, whether that be emotional unhealth or just I'm 35, so I haven't lived as long as most of the members of my church, and they've experienced things that I haven't experienced yet. And so I think for me, if I think of an example, it would be I know that I have overshared things about the previous ministry I was in and, the kind of toxicity of that and the pain that caused and what it comes out as bitterness that's unresolved in me, which there probably still is some bitterness unresolved in me. And so that's where I tend to I sort of display an immaturity when it comes to my own bitterness that then it's hard to lead people out of their own bitterness, so that's where it's tricky. And I also think for me, one of the big insecurities I deal with is people pleasing. And so I can tend to overshare as a way to people please, like to connect with somebody and almost pull them into my own pain or whatever. And, and I know that in the past I have probably not lied, but fudged how hard something was or how bad something was so that they would relate to me more easily. And that's part of that people pleasing thing. So I think you got to be careful of that. But like you said, when weakness just happens in front of people, that, that's okay. I shared with you guys a few weeks back, I made like a big mistake on an online service where I didn't edit something out and it just broadcast as, we're doing virtual live and I missed a couple edits in a sermon. And like people in the chat and later on told me like, wow, I relate to you so much more knowing that you're not actually like, that you're not perfect when you deliver these sermons online or whatever. So I think those are okay because it just happened. I didn't like manufacture that. I didn't try to, but I think where it gets dangerous and oversharing is when you start to get into the territory for me of displaying an immaturity in some way or trying to pull people into your insecurities like people pleasing.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I think heading into it, just recognizing that at our best on a healthy day, all of us kind of have some desire to be rock stars and songwriters. Mm-hmm. And so we all have a little bit of Taylor Swift in us where anything that we're going to use for our own content is typically going to be something pulled from our own experience. So recognizing that, and also that even if it's that we're not oversharing about ourselves, but other people, like I've gotten to a point where I now have to clear all stories through my kids because they're 10, 12, and 14. Yeah. So sure. My life cannot be a sermon illustration for all the world to see. And then I think the other part is recognizing, like knowing the power of how and if and when we communicate, because on social media, once it's out there, we can't control the narrative and people aren't necessarily going to read what we're sharing. Like in a sermon, it's one thing because you're able to hear voice inflection and I'm able to control that. Even if it's rewatched, it may be oversharing, but at least I'm able to control that. Whereas if I go and put something on a post or I respond, or even if I like something, then all of a sudden people are able to interpret that in a totally different way. We had, as all of us as a nation have kind of stepped into this conversation of racism and Black Lives Matters and all those sorts of things. I was in an attempt to show love for somebody who was pretty aggressively against not only the white evangelical church, but our church specifically. I was trying through social media to show, hey, I don't agree with you, but I still love you. Somebody screenshotted that and sent it to my senior pastor.
Oh,
And so like I've come to that place of going, oh, actually, like how transparent can I be? Not very. And I think the other thing that I've seen, and I was in fact talking with my wife about it this last week, I find it interesting that as soon as people who are in church ministry leave, they all of a sudden become very verbal about anything from face masks to presidential campaigns to if Black Lives Matter to COVID and conspiracy theories. So, I'm not saying that they leave the church and then all go to one side, but it's that all of a sudden it's just interesting that actually as pastors and as people on church, I actually think we're keeping a lot of things in and under that we can't say. And as soon as you leave the church, I'm seeing all of my friends that have just left the church for lots of different reasons in the last few years have some very strong opinions that they didn't share a year ago. And you're like, oh, okay. So the church was actually giving you a bit of a lid that maybe we all want to keep on that.
So as pastors, should we err on the side of not sharing enough, or should we err on the side of oversharing? I think I've gone back and forth on this. I probably still err on the side of oversharing at times for my personal life, not necessarily every little thing I believe.
So Tim, let me ask you this. Let me ask it to you this way.
Yeah.
You have kids of different ages, right? How old's your oldest kid and your youngest kid?
Ages 10 down to 3, 5 kids.
Okay. So there are things you will talk to your 10-year-old about that you will not talk to your 3-year-old about. And if they're in the room together, you're going to default to the 3-year-old pretty much, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that's a good way to think about, like, we have to default to what the least mature, factor is, especially on social media, man. Like, it's just, it's not a breeding ground for eloquent speech and mature thought. It's literally designed for outrage because that's
I disagree with clicks.
That. You do?
No, not at all.
That was him on social media.
Yeah, that was me on social media. I was.
Yeah. So I think, there's stuff that I talk to my wife about that we don't talk about in front of our 5-year-old, because she can't handle that decision. I think that's what oversharing is to me, is like, there's a sense in which the seat we sit in as pastors is almost like team dad, so to speak. Like we're overseers of this group of people who we're also a part of, but the role we play is the role of like a father in a family. We protect, we oversee, we provide. And there's things that we don't talk about in front of the kids. There's arguments my wife and I don't have in front of our daughter because she can't handle that anxiety and that she's not emotionally mature enough to deal with that. And I just think that's one way to think about it. If you have multiple kids, 10 and 3, you default to the 3-year-olds level when they're all in the room together. And on social media, you should just assume they're all in the room together.
I think that's super wise because you can't control the audience of who's going to see things.
Right.
And just because something's true does not mean that it needs to be said. There's a lot of things in my life. I think my wife and I have a wonderful relationship that is beautiful and loving and intimate, and nobody needs to know about that. And so but I think unfortunately we get to a place where we want to try and connect. Our profession is connecting with people. And so because we connect with people, like we find the things that connect well. And so you're like, oh, if that was good, then just wait for this story or this truth or this thing in my life. And I think that we have to be careful. And again, I've done that probably as much as anybody else. So it's not saying Tim, is you saying I probably overshare. I do too. But I think especially in this last 6-month season and stepping into now more adult ministry, though, I would say in the last couple of years, I've probably done more parent ministry and family ministry than actual youth ministry. Of just going like, for the sake of connecting, I can't go and lay those things on the altar.
I think to me, oversharing, it can like progress in our lives. Like for me, oversharing used to be me being passive aggressive. The worst. I'm about to admit something to y'all. This is absolutely freaking embarrassing, but the worst overshare I ever did was in one of those large youth pastor groups. And I came to this church and they said that they would only purchase PCs and wouldn't purchase Macs. And I don't even know how to use a PC anymore. One day I was in the sanctuary just hanging out and I looked up in the tech deck and realized every computer in the tech deck was Mac. And I just recorded. I was like, our church only purchases PCs. And I just, they were up there. And I just posted the video super passive aggressively. Somebody went into the youth pastor group screenshotted the picture, went to our church website, looked up our senior pastor, and said, "Your head student guy is putting your whole church on blast." And then I'm getting a call on a Saturday from the senior pastor, which in my church, if you get a call on a Saturday, like, that's bad. So for me, that's when I first started realizing emotional intelligence is so vital when it comes to like oversharing. You have to be keyed in on how you feel, and you have to be keyed in on how other people are seeing you. I got away from that, and then it moved into like, okay, I'm not going to do it passive aggressively, but now I may overshare out of, basically it's the old school, here's a prayer request, except now it's more like I'm confiding into you. And I've learned there's, like, for me, I have to have, I don't know if you would call them, but some barriers set up in my own life, to make sure that I don't overshare. Like, I'll just level with you, like this pastor group of us meeting, it's a great barrier for me, because sometimes we get on the chat a little earlier before we start recording, and man, that's healthy for me, because a transition for me, and I know a few of y'all have transitioned and stayed in the same church. When you transition and stay in the same church, that the people who you used to could confide in, now that you're in a different space in leadership, it hurts them to pull you into that space. And I've had to learn, like, there are people who are my best friends on staff, and I love them. But right now, loving them well means not filling them in on everything I know. And that's been really hard, because it almost can feel like, are we not friends anymore? But it's not that at all. I'm trying to figure out where transparency and oversharing is. I don't know how you are. A lot of times I hate it about myself. I wear my feelings on my sleeve sometimes. I can't get in an argument with you.
Dude, I wear them on my face.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I can't get in an argument with you, and then we walk out this room and like do church. I wish I could. So like, I'm having to figure out, where do I take that in a healthy place? And I don't know if you guys have any barriers that you've set up to kind of help you mitigate that, but I'd love to hear anything y'all have done.
Delmar, I really like that you said that you've had this shift in your church and your role responsibilities. Now there's people that you used to confide in that you no longer can, because that's literally right where I am. I had this conversation with my wife probably 2 months ago, that I felt like some of the best friends I had at my church are no longer my best friends at my church. It's not because we're any less friendly. It's just because I don't feel like it's a safe place, or it's healthy for them to, confide with them. Because there was, quite a few people who were walking with me alongside this transition into the senior pastoral role that I find myself in, who I needed to talk to. And now I find myself, not wanting to go down that road with them anymore. So it's a good discussion for us.
I mean, I think it is so easy for us to bleed over into an unhealthy manipulation of people by, what we're talking about is oversharing. But like I said, where you start to, I'm sharing things with you to get you to feel a certain way about either a decision or another person, and I just think that's like tool in the hand of Satan to divide the church if you're not careful. So I think a barrier is you got to have some kind of healthy outside. I have a pastor friend who I can text like with no filters, and we text each other once in a while and laugh about stuff. And he was a guy that discipled me as a high school, college kid. And so, I have a long history with him, and I can ask him questions without feeling like, I think you need to be able to have somebody that you can ask questions where there's no consequences for you asking the question.
And I think the hard part in that is that when you're shifting roles and you stay in your church, it's one thing when you go from church to church, because then all of a sudden you kind of build a new friend group. But when you are evolving in that relationship, it's tough. And I think that's why anytime you see somebody talk about like a healthy life, it's that they have those people almost intentionally outside of their church, because they know that no matter what your role in that church is, it's going to change. So I think you have to have those. And coming from a guy who doesn't have those. So it's me beginning to recognize the fact that I'm going to have to establish some of those. And now my people group is changing, because I've had years of people that I can sit and commiserate about student ministries, but I need to find cool life group pastors to talk with. And I don't know any of those. So,
hey, I have a friend who went from youth ministry to executive pastor, and they were like, the executive pastor community is the most boring community ever. So I can only imagine the life group pastor community is like besides being a small niche, it's probably a special.
So far, I've been riveted.